So now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Rebecca Butterworth. Rebecca works at the United World College of Southeast Asia on the Dover campus as the high school principal, and she's been there for 3 years. Prior to that, she worked as a secondary principal in Zurich and an assistant principal at an international school in Beijing for 9 years. Well-being is a passion of hers personally and professionally, and most particular, supporting others in taking charge of their own well-being. The title of our presentation today is Measuring Impact, Leading Mental Health and Well-being in a Large International School.
Thank you very much, Athena, and it's wonderful to be with you this evening. It's this evening here in Singapore. It's 9 p.m. at night, so really wonderful to have so many people that are keen to hear more about our story, but also to that are clearly passionate about well-being and mental health as well. I'm going to begin by starting to share my presentation. Okay, so as Athena said, I'm looking at, or we have been looking at as a college, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the college in a minute, the way in which we can measure the impact of the work we're doing around mental health and well-being. And I will talk a little bit about the school, but first of all, just briefly about myself. Athena did introduce myself as well. I am working here in Singapore, as Athena said, I've been here for 3 years. There is my email address, so feel free after the session, if you'd like to get in touch, find a little bit more information. I have included my Twitter handle. I'm not a big, Twitter user, but you can also reach out through LinkedIn as well. But just before we get started, we're going to use the chat. So if you would like to just do a quick hello in the chat to the rest of the participants and ourselves, do you want to go ahead and say hello and maybe introduce yourself and where you are? I can see a few people. Hi Anna Shafali, who's in India at the moment. A few people are lovely. Got people from Qatar as well, and Lisbon. We are an international group. There is no doubt about that. In Spain, in Indonesia. Lovely. A few more people from India and from New York. Lovely. Another person from Qatar as well. Honduras, welcome. Cynthia from Honduras. And got another person from India as well. So really lovely to see all of you. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what I'm going to focus on today. So I want to spend a little bit of time initially talking about the school that I'm in. That context is quite important for the project that I'm going to share with you. And also the second part, we'll be looking a little bit at some of the assumptions that we had about mental health and well-being in our college. And then actually our work to define well-being and then to actually better understand the issue. I just want to conclude maybe with a gesture towards some of the challenges that I think we're all facing now around how to remain agile and responsive to emerging well-being issues within our context. So I'm at United World College Southeast Asia, which is part of the UWC movement. So just understanding, first of all, that context. So the UWC movement is the United World Colleges. We're a group of 18 colleges from around the world. And you can see here just a sample of those 18 colleges, from Moshi in East Africa, the Waterford School in Southern Africa, Mostar in Europe, and Lipo Chungin in Hong Kong. We've got a college in India, in Pune, near Pune as well. We're actually the largest of the colleges, and this is an important part in terms of the project that we're doing. In the United World College of Southeast Asia, here in Singapore, we actually have 2 campuses, and you can see there by the numbers, we're quite large. So we actually have 5,553 students at the moment across 2 campuses. However, where I'm based is actually on our Dover campus. And the Dover campus, we actually are 50 years old next year, and the other campus is 10 years old. That's also important, for us, because we're a campus that's steeped quite strongly in history, being 50 years old, where the traditional one, we are the largest of the UWC colleges around the world. And you can see there that we also, what's a little bit unique about us amongst the movement of UWC colleges is that we go all the way from K to 12. So most of the United World College schools are actually 11 and 12 or 10, 11 and 12. So we're one of the few that goes all the way from the youngest students. Now, what I'm going to focus on as a high school principal is our high school campus, on Dover. And I should have mentioned too that we're just under 3,000 on the Dover campus, and within the high school at the moment, we're just under 1,300, and our numbers have shifted just slightly with some of our students who weren't able to enter the country, unfortunately. You can see here too that we have a maximum capacity in our graduating class, our grade 12 class each year of 330 students. In our grade 11 class of 330 as well. We have a new intake in grade 10 called our FIB students, which approximately are actually between 36 and 44 students each year. And our grade 9 and 10 are just under 300, in terms of our capacity. I share these numbers with you because that's part of our challenge when we're thinking about mental health and well-being, is how to do that effectively and meaningfully within such a large context. The high school is the largest part of our Dover UWC College. But an important part of who we are actually are our scholars. And these are students who come to us from around the world. They apply to be part of a UWC college, and where they go is a little bit the luck of the draw, but they go through a fairly rigorous process that's also means tested in terms of the amount of the scholarship that they receive. And we have groups of donors that support our scholarship students. They do come from around the world. We currently have 100 scholars, across our two campuses. And you can see the breakdown there in terms of our numbers in 52 grade 11 and 41 grade 12 students. They do come from around the world, and that's important for our context. We will have students who are from Burkina Faso. This year we have our first Haitian scholar and our first scholar from Panama as well. Usually our scholars, we will have that most of them coming in grade 11 and 12. And we will have one student, who's from a country in grade 11. And then ideally we have a scholar from the same country in grade 12. But basically the colleges, take scholars from only a broad selection of countries to ensure that we're not having scholars just from one particular country. So our scholars are an important part of who we are across the movement, and it's about giving back, and it's about empowering young people who had very different life chances to us, who have come from more privileged contexts. But within our very large context of UWC, there are a very small percentage of our student population, and that factors into some of our work around mental health and wellbeing. As a college, we are very mission-driven. The mission actually unites the whole movement. The UWC movement makes education a force to unite people, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. So all 18 colleges are driven by that mission. How we interpret that in terms of our guiding statements, like our values, depends on the college itself. So here at Southeast Asia and Singapore, we've rewritten our values, and you can see them there: commitment, compassion, inclusion, integrity, openness, responsibility, and trust. As a UWC, we actually are very mission-driven and very values-driven. And that is an important part of our ethos and our definition as a movement, but also individually as a college as well. We're actually going through a process of reviewing our guiding statements. This is actually a draft document where we're trying to articulate, what's central to our ethos. So not only do we espouse to be very mission-driven and values-driven, we're also have a holistic learning program and our own written curriculum. And part of that holistic learning program, and that's actually this diagram here, is that we believe very strongly that all students must participate in activities, outdoor education, personal and social education, and service, as well as their academics. What we're beginning to define is some of that kind of key learning principles around that. But this is an important piece because it factors into the amount that we're asking our students to do in living our very aspirational mission that we have. So we ask our students to do quite a lot in the college. Now, an important part of us in particular, in Singapore, as the largest of the UWC colleges, we've also got a very strong reputation academically. Now, these are our results from last year. And there, you can see here, I mean, this is very high and actually unusually high. Our students actually, unlike many others, did benefit from the absence of exams. And we had 44.1% of our graduating class of 329 who achieved 40 plus points last year. And I share this not to celebrate the results so much, although we do, but actually to point to some of the complexity of what we're dealing with in our context of high achievement. So that's a little bit of our context. And I want to take a step back to 2018-19 and just share with you a little bit of what we thought were some of the issues around mental health and well-being in the college. So I arrived in, actually I'll just take us back one step. I actually arrived in January 2018, and one of the things that I heard quite a bit as I was coming in was that our students were very, very much high achievers, perfectionists, and very driven. And so that was informing some of my thinking when I started in the college. I just wanted to take a pause for a minute. So we're going to use the chat a little bit. We haven't got breakout rooms, so I thought we could use the chat actually to share some of our thinking. The first question, before I go and share what our assumptions were about our students, within our particular context in terms of mental health and well-being, I wonder if you could use the chat to actually write down what do you believe is the source of well-being issues in your schools? So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for people to put their thoughts in the chat, and I'll speak to some of them as they start coming in. But when you think about your own schools, what do you believe is the source of well-being issues in your schools? I'll just pause there and let you use the chat. And I think I can see one that came in, which is checking off a box versus actually teaching it and measuring it. And that, I think, is connected to that idea of seeing well-being as something that is something you do rather than actually something that you try and get a good, deep understanding of. Social media is coming through, finding a work-life balance with the IB course load. Yeah, and this is a really important point, especially now with all fun activities and events being cancelled. That's from Brittany. Yeah, social media has come through again, anxiety from Edwina. Let's mention that, assessment and grades. Hello to Lydia, by the way. Yep, workload is coming through, students feeling overwhelmed, high expectations of self, parents and school, and workload. And I think one of the things, the very first one that came in, which is that idea of actually measuring well-being, is a piece I'd like to pick up on. So I'll just go back to the presentation, keep on putting your ideas into the chat as well. One of the things that we observed in our college is that our students in many ways seem to be flourishing. And so we kind of assumed, because our students were hyper busy, very busy, and I'm going to share some images with you in a minute, we thought, okay, they're flourishing, but there was a but there. There was something that we didn't quite understand. We saw them as very engaged in the community because they were doing so much and achieving so well. We saw them as getting a lot of meaning from living the mission and actually taking a lot of responsibility to make that mission become a reality. So feeling the weight and responsibility of sustainability and peace education. And of course, we saw a lot of high achievement. But one of the things that actually was a but for us was how deep and meaningful some of the relationships were between students. We were worried about, that maybe there was a lot of competition, and we weren't sure. We weren't seeing actually students letting their hair down and just having lots of fun, being a bit silly. We actually also didn't see staff doing that a lot at times as well. So that made us wonder, about what some of the challenges might be. And one of the things, I'll show you some images that these are images from some of our sports and arts activities. And one of the things that the college has prided itself on is we have extraordinary artistic performances. This last image that I've just clicked on is from a musical performance where our students were rehearsing for 500 hours in the lead up to that musical performance. We pride ourselves on our varsity teams, and, our sports in high school are competitive, and it's competitive entry into those sports. Even our music program, which is extraordinary, and during COVID, There was no let up in terms of trying to push the boundaries of possibility to ensure that performances still happened. All of this is wonderful, and brilliant. And then we also ask our students to be heavily involved in outdoor education and service learning. And these are all things that we see as helping our students flourish. And many of our students would not want to give any of these things up, but they also expect to be achieving these kinds of results as well. And so we knew that what we were looking at was a little bit of a culture of, or a lot of a culture of perfectionism and competitiveness, and that the high achievement, across all domains, whether it was service learning, whether it was, a drama performance, sports, and academics, was actually pushing students to, we were assuming, for them to feel like it wasn't okay to make mistakes. And this quote particularly resonated for us as adults when we were trying to understand this problem, that we were really concerned that, many of our students were feeling as though that really making a mistake was not something that was possible, or that somehow they were a lesser person for that. Then we did look at some data. We looked at our counselling data in 2018, 2019. We get counselling data in terms of the number of visits about once a month. And you can see here that, first of all, this is for grade 11 and 12. And of course, we saw this is the month of November in 2018, a big jump in the number of cases. And we equated that with university applications, predicted grades. We saw over here that some of the issues for which they were coming in, the highest ones were anxiety and stress. Relationships was up there quite high, but as was academic pressure. So this was starting to tell us a story. And then, of course, that particular year, we did some surveys around sleep patterns. And that was worrying. We can see here that, we've got about 39% of students who actually said they're only getting 3 to 4 hours. Oh, sorry, this is talking about homework or coursework on a weekday night, that they were doing 3 to 4 hours. From a sleep point of view, we've got 36% of our students who are saying they only got 4 to 6 hours sleep, which we know isn't enough. So we were getting evidence that something wasn't right, but we still weren't fully understanding what the issues were. We were also, as adults, engaging a lot with things like challenge success, and working a lot actually with our parent. We started to work with our parent population because we saw them as part of the problem, actually. So one of the things that we started to do in our thinking was, as I said, kind of position parents as part of the issue. I particularly liked, this cartoon, where it says, "Good news, Mum, I was accepted to the college of your choice." And because what we were seeing was that November was a peak month in terms of students going to see counsellors, was also around the time of predicted grades. And of course, the parents we were hearing from were those that were actually, trying to advocate for higher grades or that sort of thing. And we were putting, two and two together in one sense. But again, it was an assumption that we were making. And that's important in terms of when we look at the data in a minute. We were doing a lot of work in terms of engaging with making with turning the tide, making caring common, work out of Harvard as well. And we did some great work with our parent community, and it really resonated for them that actually this whole focus, of around elite universities and Oxbridge applications and so on was a real problem. We saw, like many schools, many high achieving schools, that our students were applying to only a certain, 20 universities because they saw those as the only ones that were actually worth getting into. And what we were trying to dig to was, well, where is this message coming from? We believe we're not getting that message. It's got to be coming either from within the student body, but more importantly from the parents themselves. So in a lot of our work that we were doing with parents towards the end of the year of 2018, 2019, and into the start of 2019-20 was around this kind of work, where we would lead parent workshops. We would really put some quite challenging, facts on the table. These two quotes are really quite, powerful. And I'll just read the first part of the first one. At the core of excessive achievement pressure in middle and upper class communities is one fundamental myth. Only a small number of highly selective colleges will position students for success. Students who are convinced that these colleges are the key to success will continue to be hounded by fears of disappointing or shaming their parents and themselves until they and their parents embrace the reality that their chances are very high of being accepted at one of a wide range of colleges that are just as likely to lead to success. And that's from Challenge Success. And so we really saw that we needed to be pushing this a lot with our parent community. And we took a bit of the higher moral ground at this point to believe that actually, you know, we as adults within the community, as teachers and as leaders, we're not applying the pressure to students, but that our parent community was. And that really we needed to be challenging parents to ask themselves these hard fundamental questions about who they want their children to be and how they would model that for them as well. And that led us to thinking, well, actually, what we need to do is define well-being, because once we do that, then actually the problem will be solved in one sense, and then we all work towards that shared, you know, vision of well-being. And we did define some well-being principles, but before I share those with you, I'm curious about whether at your schools you have a shared understanding of well-being and what it might be. So again, if you're could use the chat just to put down what within your school, it could be a no, you know, there is no shared understanding of well-being, or maybe you are actually working towards something. So one's come in that's aligned with Martin Seligman's idea of thriving and an idea of flourishing. And many schools are doing that as well and drawing on things like positive education. I don't know if anybody else would like to share anything that they're talking about in their schools around well-being and what that shared understanding might be. Strength building, building resilience, empathy. That's coming a lot from that growth mindset work. Yeah, and things like, you know, it's coming up a lot, but I don't think we have a common understanding and vision. And, you know, things like the focus on physical fitness, you know, might be the limitation of that. Good, thank you. And you can keep on adding your thoughts into the chat as well. We saw this, as I said, as kind of as a priority. And interestingly, we kind of arrived at this place before we started to think about how we measure, you know, mental health and well-being. And I think I share that because it was a little bit of perhaps if we'd started out with actually looking at the data, we may have arrived at some different ideas around well-being. But actually, I will say that what we did arrive at is resonating for us. Now, we have a strategy that is for us as a college here in Singapore, and what we decided as a high school was that we really wanted to take this element of a united community, which includes things like, you know, connections across parents, students, and staff, well-being, and child safeguarding, and use it to really start to work on what would well-being principles look like in a united community. And so we started that conversation and we actually drafted well-being principles, and then somebody said to us, well, they sound a lot like self-determination theory. And they do. And that really resonated for us and felt like there was a simplicity about it. So this is just a graphic that helps to explain self-determination theory. And this is where we arrived at as a college, and particularly in the high school, we thought, okay, this really works for us because we're not trying to quantify well-being. We're talking about it as something that you can be empowered to own and take charge of yourself with the right level of support. And in self-determination theory, you know, one of the ideas is competence. And that unless you have mastery of things that are really important to you, that help you feel successful and that are essential to your own kind of wellness and thriving, then it's hard for you to be well. Similarly, relatedness is crucial. So you've got to have that sense of belonging. You've got to feel like you're connected, that you matter to others, that you're cared for, but that also you are caring for others as well. And that idea of autonomy, and having autonomy, feeling like you're empowered to have choice and to have agency, that the way in which you act is congruent with who you are and who you want to be, and that you have that sense of being able to take charge of things. When we looked at these, we also looked at these not only at an individual level, but at a team level, at a school level, and then at a campus level and a college level. And we actually said to ourselves, well, what would it mean to be a autonomous, competent, and connected? We use connected rather than related high school, you know, and part of that sense of autonomy is what led us into actually what I'll share with you in a minute, which is actually the research that we did around mental health and well-being. So we went on and we took those, we redefined them as connected, autonomous, and competent for us. We developed our own graphics and we thought, okay, we've defined well-being. We'll use it for our decision-making, and that will actually help solve some of the problems around mental health and well-being and create a shared language for students and parents. So we started to actually, the next academic year, or the end of actually 2018-19, the beginning of 2019-20, really using our wellbeing principles. And we also started to change the storyline a little bit. I'm just going to share this video with you, which is very short. So I wanted to share that one with you, and in one sense, actually, what started to be different for us in terms of changing the storyline is in the past, when we created videos about the college, they were very polished and very much about a high level of performance, whether that was in the arts or sports or, academics. They were very serious videos. And one of the things that we decided to do, if we're going to focus on well-being, then we needed to shift to actually emphasizing relationships and connectedness and the everyday. And so it's a subtle thing, but we started to kind of look at the ways that we could shift our storyline. And alongside that, begin to shift the way in which we talked about ourselves as a college. So when I came in, it was very much about, being a school that had a holistic learning program. So we valued service, outdoor education, activities and academics and personal and social education. But all of our presentations kind of led with excellence, whether that was in any of those domains, and we de-emphasized the well-being and the connectedness, and so we started to shift our narratives in the way we spoke to parents, the way we spoke to, on open days, to prospective parents, the way we marketed ourselves, the way we spoke to incoming, grade 9 parents, and we talked much more about the team around the child. And this was being driven by, a renewed focus on well-being, defining our well-being principles as well. But we still, again, even in defining it at that big picture level, we realized that we needed to better understand what was behind what we were seeing. So even when we shifted to talking about well-being, and I can remember it in August of 2019, doing a series of assemblies to students, focusing on our self-determination theory and connectedness, autonomy and competence, and thinking that, students would really feel our passion and commitment to mental health and well-being coming through in the language that we were using. But actually it wasn't resonating for students, and we needed to understand a little bit more about how to connect into the reality of their experience. So one of our excellent vice principals, Lindsay Lawrence, heard about I'll come back to this in just a minute, a mental health award that was actually through Leeds Beckett University, the Carnegie School of Education. And they have a mental health award that actually it turned out to be a really interesting process to go through. Before I come back to this slide, one of the things that was informing the need to do this was we were making a lot of generalizations. So I'll come back to the assumptions that I started with, but some of our assumptions turned out to be not as accurate as we thought they would be, and that emerged through the data that we gathered. And so part of what drove us to go to something like this mental health award was we needed to drill down to the actual evidence, and have informed opinions rather than working as assumptions, as adults about what our students needed. And they didn't want to hear about, us talking about well-being principles, and they needed us to be using the language that resonated for them. So we embarked on the Mental Health Award. Now, actually, we're into our second year of this now. And it's not about the award so much as about the process that we're going through. And the award gets us to look at our school in a range of competencies. So we're thinking about mental health and well-being through the lens of leadership and strategy, through the lens of organisational structure and culture and our staff. Organisational structure and culture in terms of thinking about our students, the support we provide for our staff, our professional development, importantly, our support for students, how we work with our parents and our carers, and also how we're working with external services. So the way it works is that we actually gather data from students, parents and staff, and we embark on a self-study process, a bit like a CIS, self-study process, but focused entirely on mental health and well-being. And we do that in partnership with Leeds Beckett University, and we do it in partnership with a mentor from Leeds Beckett that actually supports us through the process. And it's been really quite a powerful journey so far of helping us move away from generalizations and the big ideas to grounding our thinking in something much more tangible. So we made a commitment to do the award, and actually one thing that was really good on the part of the college is we had complete autonomy as a high school to do it as a pilot and to run it over 3 years. The award's also quite cost effective to do, so that was great as well. I'm going to share with you in a minute the initial survey, some results from the initial survey that we did, and we also have gone through a sort of a self-reflection and an audit. We've gone through a process also of sharing the data from the first survey, which we did almost a year ago now. Some of the sharing of the data didn't go as far as we would have liked because we hit a pandemic, and and the school had to go into circuit breaker or lockdown, and we couldn't actually have the many sessions that we'd planned with, particularly with students. But just this term, we're embarking on listening sessions, where we'll do a second survey in January, which will be a year after we did the first one. And we've just finished a staff survey, and we're actually, PL stands for professional learning. We've got a lot of professional learning that's happening as a result of what we learned through the survey itself. So what we did was we looked at different survey. We had support obviously from Leeds Beckett and through the Mental Health Award, and somebody to mentor our team through this process. And we looked at a range of different surveys, and we took the best of a whole range, and created a survey that actually we hope we can use, and get longitudinal data. It's a very long survey actually. There's 4 sections to the survey. One is for school, peers, family, and self, and this is the student survey. Our staff survey that we have just done, which I won't be sharing the results from that because we're still compiling them, but actually was organised around our WellBeing Principles. So we approached that a little bit differently. But for our student data, which is what I will share with you, it's organised around these categories on a 10-point scale. So we had some really interesting takeaways that challenged some of our assumptions. The first, starting in a very positive way, we thought that these statements actually support the idea that generally students across our high school felt safe and supported, and that was really important to us. We agreed that 7 and above on a 10-point scale was fairly good. Below 7 we were a little bit concerned. So we're glad that actually our students feel safe, and we would hope that that's the case. We spend a lot of work on safeguarding in the college. They feel proud of their school. That's great. So that sense of potentially belonging that would exist there. Many students felt like they have a teacher who's there when they need them, and that the people at my school care about me. But one of the things I mentioned before is that we didn't always see our students having fun, and this was borne out a little bit in our results. We weren't sure how connected they were to each other. That's a big worry for us in such a large school, that it could be very easy for students to not connect. And do we know, or do we make assumptions about others, was actually something else that we were curious about too. So we saw that, my school is a happy place, that students actually, that was a mean score of 6.5, which actually from our perspective was lower than where we wanted to be. Teachers in school take time to get to know students. Now, I mentioned before that one of the assumptions that we had worked under was that it was the parents who were creating the pressure, for students. And actually what came through in some of the data was that actually teachers, the adults within the community were applying some of that pressure, that, that students were internalizing pressure from school to be as good as they could be. And that was actually a little bit of a hard reflection for all of us actually in high school, because that's not what we thought we would learn. And certainly our teachers didn't believe that. Everyone is treated equally in my school. That's a cause for concern for us. And school puts too much pressure on me. So that was a concern as well. Another key takeaway that we took away from the survey was that we need to ask, why is academic achievement perceived to be more important than well-being, and where is this coming from, and how is this idea reinforced? And I think this was the area that actually for our teachers was most shocking for them, because of that assumption that it was that we actually as adults, are emphasizing well-being all the time. So we thought that in saying to a student that, don't worry, your grades don't matter, was a reassuring comment. And what our students have started to tell us is actually that's not reassuring, because to them their grades do matter. So to say to a student that not to worry about your grades is actually feeling to them like a bit dismissive. So that was actually something that was borne out through some of the anecdotal data and through some of this, quantitative data. It really became clear that the students think that actually we care more about their academic achievement than their well-being. And as I said, that was actually quite a shocking one. But then they also said that that there was a low rate in terms of caring about their own well-being over their academic achievement. And that was also worrying. And the parent piece was not as high as we would like it to be. Overwhelmingly, our students thought the school was a competitive place. So all those wonderful images I showed you of excellence also create a pressure to achieve that, it makes it very hard for our students to say no sometimes. Our students told us that they do worry about the future. Many think there's good things will happen in their life, but not as many as we would like at that high end. And this one too is something that we took away. I know how to take care of my mental or emotional health. Now, it was much lower for grade 9 than it was for grade 12. But that fits with some work that we need to do with students about, how they can support each other's own mental health and well-being. We were very curious about the extent to which students felt connected to each other because the school is so large, and that was another big assumption that we had, is that they felt disconnected. Now, however, what our students said is that there are students at school who make me feel better when something is worrying or upsetting me, and that was over the high school was a good mean score of 7.8. There are most students feel like there are students at school who are kind, and that was important. There are students at school who invite me to their home, as that mean score was 7.6 across the grade levels too. But it was interesting that students feel a strong pressure to appear successful to others. So we're beginning to see a pattern, that's borne out through the data of that kind of a drive to succeed, to achieve, to be perfect is coming through in the way in which they perceive how others will see them. This is a really powerful one. Students judge others on their grades. The mean score was 6.5 across the grade levels, but 7.4 within grade 12. And that's borne out with some of our counselling data in terms of the number of grade 12s that go and see counsellors, at key reporting times, in the school cycle too, particularly around the time of predicted grades. We also saw, and this supported one of the assumptions that we had, that students are comparing, where they go, what offers they get in terms of university, and putting pressure on themselves, in that way as well. So there's something else that emerged for us that was a little bit of a concern for our counselling team, actually, because students weren't always sure about who to go to and whether confidentiality and trust would be maintained when they did go and see somebody. So students know who they can talk to if they're worried about a friend. So across the high school, about 6.9, we would like that to be much higher. You do feel successful, capable. So students do feel successful, capable, and connected in many ways. They have people that they get along with for the most part. They feel a strong connection to their family, and they feel able to make choices about their future, and that's that autonomy piece. But this is a really interesting one, but sometimes reaching out to those who may need support is really hard. And so this is quite a low score across the high school. Students try to include people they notice are on their own. And we were quite surprised by, well, actually, probably not so surprised by that one, because we do see students on their own, but by the fact that our students maybe are not being as inclusive as they could be. And actually what starts to come through in some of the comment section of the survey is that some grade levels are quite cliquey. What was really interesting is that students perceive that there is more consumption of alcohol than there actually is. So they think that students regularly drink too much alcohol, but actually across the high school, only 2.1, was the average in terms of drinking too much. So that's a normal, actually teenage thing, I think, of perceiving that there's more happening within the grade than there actually is. Now, you feel your peers judge you by your grades, but you don't. So students judge each other by their grades. That came out, at 5.9. But students said they don't judge others by their grades. So there may be something there about that perception of being judged, when in reality, you know, that may not be happening, but students aren't talking about it. So one of the things that we need to figure out how to do is get students talking more about these issues. And of course, you know, many are saying they don't get enough sleep. And that was something that we very much anticipated. I wanted to show this one because one of the things that came out very strongly in the survey that had surprised us, but shouldn't surprise us, is how well supported many of our students felt by their family. You know, there were things like, my parents accept me for who I am. You know, so they're quite high results, and that's really powerful. When we shared this with our parents, you know, we said this is really good, that our students are feeling very safe with their parents. My home is a safe place. My family listen to me when I have something to say. That's really good. There were lovely things like my family laughed together, you know, 8.4, so a steady, you know, kind of 8.4 across the there. One of the things that this was important to share with teachers as well, because of that assumption that was floating around in our thinking that a lot of the pressure was coming from parents. Now, some of it does, you know, but actually our students told us that they're feeling really supported by their parents, but they're not always feeling really supported by their teachers. That's going to lead into something I'll talk about in just a minute. So what we did was we took this data and we unpacked it with our teachers and with our students as well. And we really kind of said, look, it's important to go through this reflection process as teachers and as school leaders, because we need to look at it deeply and we need to be willing to kind of confront what it tells us about ourselves. And one of those things was that actually, you know, we need to think about how we're building relationships with students as adults. We need to make sure that every child has a trusted adult in the community, and that that we have to understand better what we might be doing to contribute to the stress that students are experiencing in school. One of the things, though, that's always important to remember is that what I've shared with you are mean, you know, or averages, you know, across the grade levels. But each question, we had reams and reams of data. Each question hides a range of experiences. So whenever I do any kind of, you know, means or averages, it's going to be that there's going to be quite a spread. So, you know, when I look at this one, my school feels like a welcoming place. You know, a good percentage of students, you know, yes, it is. But then, you know, there are a group of students who don't feel that way. The survey was anonymous. We did give the option for students to put their name if they wish somebody to reach out and provide support. We did have some students do that. But we know that we've got more students than we would hope to have in our community who are not feeling like they belong. And we need to understand that better. Many students feel like there are places where they feel comfortable at break and lunch, but there are a few who don't, you know, and do we know who those students are, and are we helping those students? Incidentally, we're doing some work around looking at our spaces, and, you know, we've created spaces for some of our students to go into some of our office spaces and have lunch because they just need to get away from, you know, the craziness of a very busy campus. So what I've shared with you are a lot of the numbers, and then what I'm going to share with you now are some of the anecdotal comments. We had a lot of comments, and the numbers only tell us one thing, but underneath those numbers is individual stories, and those stories are really, really important, and they start to build up narratives that become very powerful things to share with our community and to help us drive change. So some things that our students said, you know, kind of beneath that data, was around obvious things that to do with where some of that stress was coming from in terms of academic stress. And one was the fact that they felt that you know, we're not coordinating, you know, between departments, we're not coordinating deadlines, and so we're contributing to stress. They see that not everyone's free to be themselves without judgments. You know, I've never had a teacher ask me if I'm okay or hear a teacher ask a peer. Now that one, actually, when we put that on the table with teachers, really shocked them. Now that's one student's perspective, but even if one student feels that way, surely, you know, we need to be much more mindful and check that every student has somebody who has that trusted adult that they talk to. And are we visible enough in asking students, you know, whether or not they're okay? This is a great one. In order to do an activity or sport, you have to try out to do it, or you already have to be good at it. Teachers are only really concerned with your performance. And that was an important one for our head of arts, you know, and our head of sports as well, that students are taking away that sense that it's about how well you perform, not about who you are. And again, that's one student, but each of these stories, you know, that was a bit of a pattern that came through, but each of these stories are important to hear and engage with as well. Our school is really big, therefore it feels very disconnected. You know, and obviously, you know, some of the things that came through about, you know, I have great relationship with my parents, but they don't accept that I'm gay, or, you know, my parents often ask me about mental health and well-being, but I don't feel comfortable telling them things, and when I do, they don't do anything about it. So things that actually we'd probably find fairly typical, you know, in terms of parental relationships. You know, things like, you know, they want the best for me, but there's quite a lot of comparing with our siblings, and they can be critical and over-involved in my life at times, but they care. So some of the comments about family, you know, were really quite lovely to read, you know, and at the same time, quite normal in terms of what you would see in family dynamics. No matter how much sleep I get, I am always exhausted. You know, I used to do well, but now the IB is just hard and it's demoralizing. Learning has gotten less fun. I think a lot of it has to do with the toxicity of the community when it comes to academics. So, you know, if anything, if any statement kind of says we need to tackle, you know, the way in which we're promoting or using our good academic results to unintentionally, you know, apply pressure to students. And this is a lovely, you know, another one. Ever since IB started, whenever I do something I enjoy, like cooking, I can never do it without thinking that I'm wasting my time and I should be studying instead, so I can try to get more sleep. And I think it's really quite sad. Okay. Just before I continue, I'm curious about whether some of the things I've shared actually resonate for you and what you might be seeing in your own communities. And I know that I can see too that, you know, for some people, I should have said actually, we're back on campus, so we're not actually doing like virtual learning at the moment, so we're lucky in that way. But I can see that, you know, for some that would be adds that other dimension. You know, I'm going to come to that in just a minute at the end too. I think there's that, you know, piece about sharing our results so vulnerably, and I think that's an important part of our process. Is that we have to share these stories, and I can see the things that are coming through very relatable, you know, absolutely. And I think the more that we share the stories too, the more that we might empower our own communities to find solutions, and also for our students to connect with each other too, as well, in different ways. I just wanted to share this with you. You know, Samaritans of Singapore, actually, I'll just go back one slide. So one of the things that we really pulled out of this work is that idea of how we build those relationships. And so I'll come to this slide now, sorry. But the Samaritans of Singapore is an organisation, you know, here that works on suicide prevention, and it's a volunteer organisation. Now in Singapore, mental health has been taboo, you know, for a long time, but that's shifting. And it started to change. It's been changing over the last couple of years. Just before the pandemic hit, actually, I was at a conference that SOS ran, which was really powerful. It was bringing in, you know, different members, including the police force, you know, in to speak about, you know, because there'd been high rates of suicide amongst young men in Singapore. And we'd had a very difficult circumstance on our campus as well, you know, around an attempted suicide too. So, organisations like SOS in Singapore, you know, is really trying to move forward to address, you know, some of the suicide rates here. And this is you know, quite a powerful image. So you could look at this in different ways. And the point that we wanted to make with our teachers is the more time we spend building relationships and really seeing and hearing. So we'd worked on a whole lot of assumptions about, you know, student mental health and well-being. But when we looked at the data, it challenged some of that. And we started to really see and hear the student experience. Then we might see something that's a little bit less obvious, you know, And this is an advertisement that SOS, had up around the train stations and so on. And that was really quite powerful, getting us thinking about, mental health. So there were many conclusions that we pulled from the data, but an overarching one for us is that it's really complex, obviously, but we can't say it all resides with families and peers, and we have to acknowledge the way in which we might be contributing to the stress. And another key thing for us is that we then need to build our own capacity as adults to meet the needs of our students. So that's led to us, this is just a wonderful quote. If you haven't come across this book, Lost at School by Ross Green, it's a really powerful read. And when we were unpacking the data, this is one quote that I kind of, concluded with, because this idea that good teaching means being responsive to the hand you've been dealt with, and that means really getting to know our students and understanding where they're coming from, and not being caught in the glossy, everything is so good and that the high achievement, but really getting to know our students, and that's where the hard work is. So as part of our process of going through this mental health award, we've identified that, we want all of our staff to go through safe talk training, and that's the first stage of suicide prevention training. And so, we're building our capacity to recognise, students who are at risk. We're also working with a consultant, who's supporting us with something called All Kinds of Minds, which is about understanding that we've got different types of learners in the classroom and really helping high school teachers, shift away from that mindset of thinking of themselves as subject teachers to thinking about, how do I understand each and every learner in my classroom, and what might that look like, and each and every mind in my classroom. We're also working with an organisation called Sea Change Mentoring. This is all happening virtually, by the way, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But we're working with Sea Change Mentoring, and they're working with our heads to start with about building capacity again to have those connecting conversations, with students, and to build relationships with students and really have good mentoring conversations with students, so they feel as supported as they can be. All of this we'd planned to do face-to-face, but we're doing it all virtually this year, and it's proving to be very powerful. And we're continuing with our work around cognitive coaching as well. So where we are now in terms of the Mental Health Award is that we've done a lot of surveys now. We've got surveys from staff that are actually coming in too, and that will feed into our process. We've gone through, and I won't go through all of this, but we've gone through our own sort of self-study and audit, that's also gone parallel to all the data that we've been gathering as well. And this has been really positive. We can see we're doing many things that structurally, that are really good and powerful. But we need to build our capacity, for staff. The other thing that I haven't actually got here so much is that we're also looking at diversifying our learning pathways for students. We're very, very exam-driven high school at the moment in terms of we have UWCSEA and IB diploma. So we're also embarking on really important conversations about, building our own courses. We've got our own high school diploma and our own written curriculum. So let's build our own courses that actually, have students engaging and learning in different ways as well. So we're about to go into our second year now of the Mental Health Award, and we'll do another survey of students and compare that data. But we're also, like everybody, now having to engage with a very volatile and uncertain context, and that whole VUCA context. And part of what we're all dealing with, and now that we're factoring into how we as a college, move forward with the Mental Health Award, is what's been the impact of lockdown, of the pandemic, and the isolation that everybody is feeling. And so we're quite curious to see, when we get the data, what we'll see that might be similar or different, because we've just gone through, a really difficult time, but we are all on campus at the moment. This is an image from our graduation that, was a wonderful time, but also a very difficult time because, none of us could be connected to each other except virtually. I'm going to skip the slide, but the other thing that also we're now, we've had to confront in one sense is conversations about racism, about anti-racism, and how that fits into our college context as well and across the UWC movement actually. So as we look at the next stage of the Mental Health Award and gathering kind of more input and where we move forward, we're working with a group of students who are part of our Diversity, Equity and Inclusion task force, who are actually going to help us look at our questions on the survey and build in some that actually tap into some of those questions about, you know, ethnicity and race and culture and belonging that may not be there or might be implied in some of the statements that we have in the original survey. And so part of our challenge, you know, moving forward, I think, so I'm just going to skip that slide, just out of interest of time, is really trying to ensure our community stays unified around a shared purpose of focusing on mental health and well-being, while at the same time being responsive and agile enough, you know, to deal with the things that are emerging. And for us, you know, some of that is intense work around diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice. And particularly, and I only touched on this, but particularly for our scholarship students who, you know, who come from very different contexts, you know, and walk into a highly affluent, you know, very large school. And alongside that, the ongoing issue that a pandemic presents, you know, to our community as well. The piece that we haven't done with the award as yet is come back to what it means for our parents. So I'm going to stop sharing there. We've only got 2 minutes. You know, I'd hoped we'd had a little bit more time for questions. But if you have questions, you know, if you want to pop them into the chat, we've still got a couple of minutes left. Otherwise, I will pop my email address in. I'm just typing it in now. And you are more than welcome to drop me a line if you would like to. I haven't shared the presentation more widely simply because it does have some comments in there from students, and I want to protect, you know, those students as well, even though it's all anonymous. But you're more than welcome if you want me to share anything. But I think I can see a few comments coming through. You know, those issues, you know, from Sarah around, you know, students being able to connect, you know, in a hybrid context. Yeah, and that's a key thing about how to support students in connecting in this new setting. And, you know, one of the things that I learned when we went into that kind of context is that actually teachers needed to start modeling having fun, you know, and connecting and making funny videos and being a bit silly. And that supported students in figuring out ways to do the same thing with each other, actually. Yeah, and I think there's a comment there about, you know, that beginning to look at the data as a starting point. Yeah, so a lot of the data seems to be resonating for people. I'm aware that we're just about to run out of time. As I said, I popped my email address in the chat if you'd like to connect. If you'd like to know more about the Mental Health Award, then do let me know. It's actually a really powerful process. Yeah, and as somebody just said, great idea, teachers need to be funny themselves, absolutely. You know, trying to keep a sense of humor around everything at the moment is probably pretty key. So thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully I'll hear from some of you at some point. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, for this very insightful presentation and sharing your experiences with us.